Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Happy April Fools. Debbie, I never see your hair down.
I had computer issues all this week and I just couldn't take the stress of pulling my hair back anymore in addition to the computer issues. So, yeah, I just decided to just let it go.
Released.
Yeah, just
I like it.
let it go. Thank you.
Carly, if you could just let me know when we have quorum.
Jessica, I'm here. I'm just driving up from the city. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, David.
I believe that we have quorum now.
Great. Thank you, Carly. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the April 1st, 2021 meeting of CB11's Environment, Open Space, and Parks Committee. My name is Jessica Elliott, and I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:33, a record. Tonight, we are joined by Assistant District Manager Carly Wine, the staff liaison to our committee. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. 1, no one may speak until granted the floor. 2, CB11 members, if you have a question about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear and you should find the raise hand function there. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty to the staff. The chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us of any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. Please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. Members of the public, if you have a question or comment about the subjects on the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom and wait to be recognized. All right, we will now take attendance by roll call. Board members, you can unmute yourselves and answer present when your name is called.
Collier.
She said she was going to be a little late.
Elliott.
Here.
Encarnacion. Giordano.
Present.
Heredia. Lee.
Present.
Mastrada. She's here.
Present.
Okay. McCullough. Quinones.
Of course, present.
Schuler.
Present.
Wiltshire Clement.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Carly. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and was posted online. If there's no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Committee members, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from our last meeting were distributed to community members ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the meeting minutes from that meeting. Committee members, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the last the last committee meeting are adopted. They will be available on the Community Board 11 website. All right, so we'll start with announcements. I don't know, Carly. Partnership for Parks is hosting its My Park cleanup event at Thomas Jefferson Park on Saturday, April 10th from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Registration is required. I'm personally going to try to be there at that event. So if anyone else would like to join me, I think it would be great for us to get boots on the ground, as Xavier would say. And CB11 will be hosting its next full board meeting on Tuesday, April 20th at 6:30 p.m. Are there any other announcements? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to informational updates. Randall's Island Park Alliance.
Hi, everyone. Happy spring. Nice to, it's my dog, sorry. Nice to see everyone again. So just real quick, we today officially have opened up all the athletic fields on Randall's Island. It was our last group of the grass soccer fields are now officially open. So all is running smooth there. We had our first couple of track meets at Icon Stadium too. They're smaller than usual, separating out the athletes running with the ones warming up outside the stadium, but we're excited to just kind of see things getting back to normal out at the park. We're also reintroducing a lot of our volunteer events this month. We're going to have Saturday and Sunday Urban Farm Volunteer Exploration Days and Urban Farm Volunteer Days for people interested in that. We have horticulture volunteers, natural areas volunteer days. We have an Earth Day volunteer event. And, you know, we normally have this time of year our Cherry Blossom Festival, which is a big free public event that we host. Obviously, we're not doing those large events, but we are kind of having a Cherry Blossom Celebration Week, which is the last week, it's the week of the 26th of April. And there's a lot of virtual cherry blossom tours for people to kind of explore on their own. We're going to have some stuff like selfie stations that people can be, but a way to get out and enjoy the park, since unfortunately we can't do the big gatherings that we so often like to try to have out there. So that's it. All this information is on our website under the events, and I'm happy to, if anyone wants more specific things, to go over it. But it's, you know, we're really excited to be able to have these sorts of things back in the park. All the volunteer events also are by registration, so this way we can control the numbers to make sure it stays at a safe number of people. And then one final thing that's really, really exciting is we've been in conversations with the Department of Transportation over some essentially like bike safety issues. We've seen a big uptick in people riding bikes. We got City Bike last year, which has been fabulous. But there's certain spots that we've noticed that seem to be problematic and could possibly be dangerous. So we reached out to DOT to see about what solutions they might have, and they came up with some crossing safety implementations. The one that really is good is the one, actually, it's by the Sport Time Tennis Center. When people come off the pathway, they kind of jump that curb and they're going to Central Road, and they're actually going against traffic, crossing the fire department to cross over to Central Road by the stadium to continue back down south. So we brought them out there, showed it to them, and they came up with a design that kind of would keep them separate off the traffic to implement like kind of pedestrian island going past FDNY. The other area is by Hellgate Circle and Central Road, which is an area that we've had issues with people kind of blowing stop signs and not really, you know, being cautious, especially the drivers, like on the straightaway down Central Road. So it's a couple of upgraded like bike lanes along the curb and also crossings for pedestrians. So we're excited about these. I know that DOT sent over to CB11 the kind of sketchings, and I believe they are appearing at the Transportation Committee on the 6th to go over them. I don't know if you guys have seen them or not. I think it literally just went out yesterday, the letter to NILSA. But these are, really exciting things that we think, particularly this year, we've just seen such an increase in pedestrian and bike ridership in the park. It's been wonderful. We want to make sure that these trouble spots are taken care of. So that's about all I have. If people have any questions.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions from the board? Any questions from the public?
All right.
Seeing no hands. Thank you so much, David. Nice to
No
see
problem.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you too.
Great. And we'll move on to New York City Parks. Is Sheena here or Jaina?
Jessica?
Hey, there you are.
Sorry, I'm going in and out. Hello, everyone. I'm Jana, the administrator for Historic Harlem Parks. Great to be here. NYC Parks, one big thing we want to share tonight is that our Litter Ambassadors program is going to launch, along with a few other offshoot programs, such as the Junior Litter Committee. So as everybody knows, there were challenges with trash last spring, summer, and fall with barbecues and other parties and people leaving trash in the park. So we're trying to get ahead of that with a variety of initiatives. The one I, as an administrator, will be really reaching out to people in April about is Litter Ambassadors. And very simply, it is this opportunity to work with community partners and volunteers around the park to walk around and just say hello to people having fun in the park, having barbecues and events in the park, and hand them orange trash bags. We will have these orange trash bags really as a signifier of the importance of trashing your trash. And also a little just separating them from our other trash bags that house parks, paraffin, park sleeves, etc. So these orange trash bags will be handed out by our ambassadors and essentially just asking people to please, enjoy your event and close up your trash and leave it in the trash corrals. So there's also a junior litter ambassador program that Partnership for Parks will be running. And that actually has a lot of fun games involved and competition, including winning a canoe trip with our urban park rangers. So that is the big push for us this spring as we head into spring and summer. Any other questions on NYC Parks in general before I hit Marcus Garvey?
No, we can just take questions at the end.
Okay. So Marcus Garvey Park, I'll share that we're very excited. April, which is technically today, but it really next week, will be when we are officially moving in PEP in Marcus Garvey Park. So we have been initiating over the past six weeks or so a build out of a current empty space since the pandemic. Right next to the amphitheater, as you walk toward the amphitheater on your right is a small rectangular building that houses our gardeners and now will house PEP, as well as an office for me and Sheena Kaufman, our great park manager. We have not had offices in the historic Harlem Parks, so this is a really big thing and exciting for us. I will be based out of Marcus Garvey Park most Wednesdays and Fridays. So I welcome everybody to come by and say hello. And it will also be great, of course, to have PEP on site based out of Marcus Garvey Park. They will be there every day, 8:30 to 6:30. In addition, other things happening at Marcus Garvey Park, we're working with the support. We're very grateful of Central Park Conservancy. They're going to help us address the West Side Hill. There are erosion issues there, and they're going to help us put in some cribbing as we move some of the big limbs out from some of the trees lost to the storms. Additionally, we're working on benches and getting the benches slatted and painted and just looking good for spring as we head out of winter. Finally, the dog run. We are really excited about the new leadership of the dog run, and we are working with them to build out some support in the dog run. I've got to work with DOT, as a matter of fact, to help see about getting some arm extensions to the big light poles so we can give more light to the dog run. Also looking at ground cover and seeing about fencing in the future and potentially some water supply. And that's pretty much it right now.
Thank you so much. I realize I've been saying your name incorrectly, so it's Jana, right?
Yes,
Okay,
no
so
worries,
sorry.
Jessica.
I don't ever
No
want to
worries.
say anyone's name incorrectly.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, any questions from the board? I see we have one question from the public. Marguerite,
Yes,
free to
hi,
unmute yourself.
thank you. What is PEP exactly?
Oh, yes, sorry about that.
It's okay.
PEP is Parks Enforcement Patrol. So we at Parks actually have our own policing unit, and they really patrol our parks through the day. So 8:30 to 6:30, 7 days a week. And then we're fortunate, of course, to partner with NYPD. So the precinct also helps us, particularly in the evening hours. So PEP stands for Parks Enforcement Patrol.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Marguerite. I'm sure that comment was helpful. Great. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Jana, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
All right. We'll move on to Pelham Fritz Recreation Center.
I'm not sure if Sherry's here. Is Sherry here? No? Okay, well, I can just give a quick update. As some of you may know, the Recreation Center is under renovations. I don't have a projected date of completion, so I will be checking in on that, and Jessica help shed more light on that for the next one. Essentially, we have water damage ceiling from the ceiling, the roof rather. And we also have some electrical we're working on. And then the front of the Pelham Fritz is going to be really nice when it's done. We're working on an all glass exterior for the front to really upgrade that. And it should look really, really lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And oh, and last thing I'll just share is our rec centers, as people may know, are closed to the public right now due to COVID. However, they have been operating as caretaking places for children, for parents who need childcare, and also for food and programming for the children who are there. And please reach out if anybody's interested in learning more about that. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. That's excellent to know. Thank you so much. Any other questions from the board or the public? Great. All right. Thank you so much. We'll move to Marcus Garvey Park Alliance.
Hi,
Sorry, I went a little out of order.
that's okay. We have maps. The public art park to park maps, they're currently can be picked up at La Marqueta, and in the next couple of weeks we'll get them distributed. We're looking to locate them in like one small business per avenue, so that we can promote those local businesses. The map goes from Morningside Park to A. Philip Randolph Square, and then it's all in East Harlem after that, including Marcus Garvey Park, Cracker's Whack, which has been fully restored, White Playground, and I think that we've done maybe 5 or 6 maps. I've lost track. We do them at least once a year, sometimes twice. I really do think this is like one of the best ones we've done so far. And I think it'll be really effective, not only getting people walking from park to park, but connecting neighborhoods from Harlem to East Harlem or Central Harlem to East Harlem. And then additionally, I'll tell you about, we are launching a community outreach initiative this year. It's been made very clear that a lot of people feel like they're not being heard. And rather than have them fill out another survey, we've done that many, many times. We might get a few hundred responses, but we're really looking to talk to them face to face in the park with groups of volunteers and doing more listening than talking to them. We really want to hear what people have to say. Also, because of the extensive use of Marcus Garvey Park, we're going to be documenting who we're talking to, what their zip code is. They don't necessarily have to give us their first and last name, but we do want to know, where they live. Because we have noticed that there's really a lot of people from all over the city that use Marcus Garvey Park. That's been building up over several years. And then last year, the whole world exploded, and it's felt like it exploded in Marcus Garvey Park. So we really want to document how people are actually using the park, because it's different than it was even 5 years ago. So we want to make sure that everyone understands how it's being used and who's using it and what people really need in that space, or in any public space for that matter. I will invite, there's various community organizations that are going to be helping us do this. I'd also like this committee to maybe volunteer some time and come into the park with us and talk to people. I think it's a great way for people to really understand how parks are used in Northern Manhattan. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you so much, Connie. When would it be starting the volunteering for these initiatives?
Within a couple weeks. We're really just watching the weather.
Okay.
We want to be there when there's lots of people there.
Yeah, if you could just send us, the information to sign up and volunteer to the committee, and we can extend it to the wider board as well. That would be great.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions from the board for Marcus Garvey Park Alliance? I see we have a public question. Marguerite, go ahead.
Thank you again, Jessica. First, I'd like to say I've enjoyed those maps whenever I could find them, and I'm glad that you have them put out. I have a question though. Would the La Marquetta's location be on 116th Street and Park Avenue?
So at 115 in Park Avenue.
115, okay.
116 is Urban Garden Center. So you walk down one block and it's where there's a bistro there. There's a few vendors there. And there's, at any given time, there'll be 100 or 200 maps there. So you can take as many as you like.
Oh, great. And I have one more question. Are there event listings for Marcus Garvey's Park Amphitheater?
Not yet. And there weren't events last year. We put it on our website all previous years. This year, we're really just waiting to see how things unfold. We are expecting Classical Theater of Harlem and Jazzmobile to be back, but we don't know yet how large those events will be, how many people will be allowed to attend. Once we know, it will go on our website.
Awesome, thank you.
And Marguerite, I can add to that as the administrator who oversees programming for Marcus Garvey Park.
Yes.
In addition to the programming that Marcus Garvey Park Alliance does, we do have some updates there that we are allowed public events up to 200 people socially distanced. The challenge currently is that we are not allowed amplified sound. So that is the holdup right now in terms of the events at the amphitheater. However, if anybody does want to put in a permit to request a special event of theirs at the amphitheater, please do so. nycparksgov.org, which I'll put in the chat. And you just click on permits and then special event so that you can ask for your permitted date. We are hopeful, fingers crossed, by June. As Connie alluded, we always have Classical Theater of Harlem at Marcus Garvey Amphitheater every July. Jazzmobile is confirmed for August. Charlie Parker Festival is confirmed again, as long as we do have the allowance of the amplified sound, which fingers crossed by June, we're going to get clearance for that.
That's great. Is there any particular reason why there's a problem getting permits for sound? Like, has there been
Well, I
complaints?
don't know. I mean, NYPD would have to state that specifically, but you know, I think there is probably the thinking, which makes sense, that amplified sound attracts many more people, and we can only have up to 200 people socially distanced. And if you think about our parks, there are very few spaces. I work with Jackie Robinson Park too, and that's actually one of the spaces that can fit 200 people socially distanced. But most of our spaces can't. So if with amplified sound, there could be the concern that it attracts people over that number.
Especially at that location, because sometimes places where I go, I notice that it's considered socially distancing. Yet the row behind where you're sitting has people in it. I would think you'd have to distance inside, in front, and back of you. But
Yes, well, it is a challenge to make sure that we're all socially distanced. Yes, absolutely, especially when people are having fun.
exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you both, Connie and Jenna.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Friends of the East River Esplanade.
Hi. Two quick updates tonight. The El Barrio Bait Station at 100th Street on the Esplanade is set to come down on May 31st. It's a temporary public art piece. We are trying to extend that with parks if we can until the Esplanade is repaired. So we're hopeful, but I don't know how promising that is. In the meantime, Sari Chang, who's on the call tonight as well, she and I went and fixed the pump. So if there are any fishermen or anglers on the call, the pump is working. If you understand physics, you'll know how to get the water up. I don't, but Sari can certainly explain that. There's a bucket involved, I'm not sure, but it is functioning. So we're also trying to put an education program around the bait station, and we'd really like to do it in person. We're having a little bit of trouble getting an instructor that will come out in person and sort of following all the rules, but we're working with DEC and hopefully they can provide us with somebody. And if not, we'll do it virtually. We have a great person who can do that. But of course, it would be more fun to be on the water, especially in the springtime. So that's our goal for the next 2 months on the bait station. And then our next thing is on May 8th, Jennifer Ratner, who's our founder, will be leading Jane's Walk. Jane Jacobs was an activist in the city, did a lot of work for the communities. And so every year she's honored by the Municipal Arts Society by doing these huge walks around the city and virtual tours. Now they're virtual. So on May 8th at 11 a.m., Jennifer will be starting in East Harlem, working her way down the Esplanade. She'll give some historical hints and tips and a little bit of tidbits on art and different things that have gone on in the Esplanade. So if you guys are around, that's going to be May 8th, 11 a.m. on Instagram Live. It will be virtual. Nothing can be in person, unfortunately. And you can register on the Municipal Arts Society website mid-April. What's today? The 1st. So in the next 2 weeks, you'll be able to register for that. That's all we've got going on for the next little while, and we'll have some more updates next month.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. Are there any questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Great, thank you. And yeah, keep us updated. Nice to see you. All right, and lastly, we have Friends of Harlem Art Park Alliance.
Oh, good evening, everyone. My name is Debbie Quinones, and I'd like to just make my presentation or update in 2 parts. The first part is infrastructure of the park. You know, what has happened is that there's been a significant cleaning out of trees and space in the park, and there has been more mulch that has been distributed in those open areas. We've planted some bulbs last year that we have blooms now. But the issue is for me is that at the center of the park, there were some hydrangeas that were transplanted to the side, and there was no real maintenance plan for them, and a lot of them have died. I was going to say passed away. They died, yes. And it's really sad because they were huge. They've been there for many, many years, and I've requested a few months ago that the gardeners just go and cut down some of the hydrangeas to give them the opportunity to sprout, and that didn't happen. And as a result, we've got now out of the 5 that were transplanted to the side. Maybe only 2 are coming back. Unfortunately, the biggest one that we had, I think we lost it. But I'm hopeful that we can reach out to Robert at the Parks Department. I sent them an email to kind of just say, hey, you know, you came in, you moved a lot of stuff around. You said that you're going to come back with some redesigned concepts, and I'm hoping to follow up with that. A lot of work has been happening on the actual cobblestones that were loose, so I'm really happy about that. And you know, the lighting is good, and you know, of course, the fence in the back is something that, you know, we hope in the future will be looked at as a capital improvement, you know, project for the community. And we're just moving forward. So in terms of the second part in term is programs. So we've put in about 1 million permits, it seems like, but it's only 13. We put in 13 permits, and we put in some safety, the COVID safety plan. So we're starting to kick off. And next Sunday, we're having our Poetry Month kickoff event, where we're just inviting everyone to just come and scream if they want, you know, whatever it is that they want to do. It's a drop your mic, you know, do whatever, but just to kind of kick off Poetry Month and hear from people. And then we're having our Earth Day celebration, as many of you know. And we're also, what we're going to do that day is going to write a letter to the Earth. And we're asking people to write whatever they feel about climate change. And also, I'm going to take the opportunity to get maybe some input on the environmental justice report. So I'm gonna maybe set up a table and ask people kind of like what do they think about that. And that day we're also gonna have Susan Stair, the artist, and she's gonna come and do a workshop as well. So we're moving forward. We also have a Gay Pride kickoff event on the first Saturday in June, and it's called the Construction of Identity. We have a few things going on, and I still have to do the website. That's on my COVID to-do list, you know, but we're moving forward. So I just want to let folks know that we're moving on, and we're very excited about the map that Connie did. It's what, and I have to say, yeah, it is one of the best ones. It's really thought through, and it looks good. And that's about it.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And great idea about lifting up the environmental justice report in the community events. If everyone could, you know, when they're hosting events or doing community outreach, you know, Connie too, if you could keep that in mind too, it'd be great to get community input on those larger elements citywide. Thank you. Are there any questions for Friends of the Harlem Art Park Alliance from the board? Any questions from the public? Great. Thank you so much. This concludes our informational updates, and we will move on to our first presentation.
Hi there. This is Jordan Salinger from the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. Thanks for having us tonight. Also joined by Alda Chan, the Parks Department, and a list of other city characters that I will introduce momentarily. But first of all, yeah, thanks for having us tonight. For those that were there in February, got a chance to hear from us, give you an update on our kind of resiliency portfolio, some initiatives that are advancing in East Harlem, and kind of set the stage for the conversation we want to have tonight. For those that were there was also discussion of being able to talk through concepts and ideas from a draft deliverable that was provided to the city as part of the visioning plan process back in 2018 and 2019. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing tonight. And we're joined by Michael Haggerty, Star White House, to spend most of the evening. And hopefully we don't overwhelm you, but there's a fair amount of material that we want to go through there. We're also joined by our city partners, DOT and DEP. There's going to be a lot of visions. That was the kind of goal of this work. And so, we're kind of letting you into our process to give you a sense, some of these things as part of a visioning process are achievable, others are not. And, I think it was, we heard loud and clear, let us into the process, let us know what you're thinking, let us, let us know about the pitfalls. And so that's what we're going to be doing tonight. And, I think my last note here is that resiliency, broadly speaking, is a kind of a new endeavor for the city, and certainly in an urban context. And so, what we're doing is unprecedented. And so I think we need the space to try new things and understand what works and what doesn't. And so I think it'll be an interesting conversation, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, let me Alda from Parks, and any additional context?
Not too much to add, but thanks everyone for having us again. For those who are new to this, there may be a lot of information. We're happy to take question and answer and discuss afterwards. There's a lot of material to get through. I also wanted to acknowledge that Laura Starr from Starr White House has joined us. So we have a lot of folks who are involved in that effort here tonight to talk through that entire visioning process. I'm going to hand it over to Michael now to walk us through the work they did.
Okay. Hi, Laura. Do you want to say anything before we?
Just hello, and Starr White House was really honored to be selected by the city to do this study, and we're very excited tonight to be able to sort of unpack it in a lot more detail for you this evening. And I'm going to hand it back to Michael. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hi everybody, and just to introduce my background and involvement in this, I'm a senior associate at Starr White House. When I started, I worked on the concept plan for the Greenway, and then I was the project manager for the East Harlem Resilience Study, and currently I'm the project manager for the Greenway design. So working with some of you and a lot of the people with the city agencies on that project, which we're excited about. I think what we put together tonight, it's really kind of a walkthrough of the evolution of the vision plan, like the ideas we considered, where we started, and how we wound up where we did with the study. And I just kind of want to thank you in advance for your attention, because it's a pretty long presentation. And there's also some slides in there that have like a lot of text on them that I'm not going to read all of the text, but I'm pretty sure you're all getting the presentation. And so you'll like have the opportunity to read all of the detail if you want to. So I'm going to share my screen here. Does everybody see that?
Yes. If you could make it full screen.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it bigger. Okay. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the study scope. So this project was led by Parks and the Mayor's Office of Resiliency in collaboration. And then in addition to that, a number of other agencies were involved, DOT, DEP significantly, DCP, NYCHA, and others. And then we also had a expansive and interdisciplinary consultant team. The project was actually co-led by Starr White House and One Architecture and Urbanism. And we also worked very closely with Langen Engineering on the flood modeling. We had economists on the team, transportation engineers, and a couple of unique partners, the Institute for Public Knowledge at NYU that led a social resiliency analysis, and then also Dream Charter School was our outreach partner. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. So
Michael, I'm not seeing the slides advance. I don't know if others are only seeing the cover. I think you may be advancing.
Oh, you're right, and it says sharing is paused. Hold on a second. Thanks. Let me
It's
just.
also, Michael, you might be able to make it bigger screen also.
How does that work?
Feel smaller,
But you guys see it
see it
moving around?
advancing.
Yeah, we see it moving.
Okay.
I can help out here. So I see that you did share, you tried to share full screen. So what you're gonna have to do is share a new screen, and because it's opening up the full screen into a separate window. So if you go to the top where it says like you're sharing your screen, just
Yeah.
share a new screen and select the full screen. I have to do that all the time when sharing.
What I'm doing is I just opened up the
That's
email.
perfect.
I opened up my email, the attachment in my email, and I reduce this screen and I have it open
Okay.
in my email.
So you
It's
guys see
working now,
it,
though.
you see it
Yeah, this is
advancing?
perfect. Thank
Okay,
Yes,
I
yes.
can't believe we're like 12 months into the pandemic and
know,
I'm
right?
just finding this out now. Okay, so the study scope. So the study area that was outlined in the RFP, it roughly corresponded with the floodplain of in community boards 11 and 10 and 8, and then kind of followed the major avenues around that. When we got into the study, we actually expanded the study area for analysis to include really the entire watershed of Harlem and East Harlem. So this was a 2,500 acre area that we kind of took a broader look to understand the dynamics of drainage from rainwater in this bigger area. So that was kind of one of the first ways in which this evolved. Our study process had 3 steps that were, interrelated, leading to the vision. We did work on integrated flood protection. This was analysis and conceptual design around sea level rise, coastal surge, but then also cloudburst events, very large rain events. We had a social resiliency analysis, which really consisted of trying to understand social infrastructure in the neighborhood, the kinds of community facilities that people access, and then also this network of community organizations and service organizations in East Harlem. Parks, as kind of the lead, had a particular interest in the open space system, and as landscape architects, that's one of our lenses. And so we looked closely at all kinds of open spaces, public parks, plazas, but also open spaces, on NYCHA properties and private properties. And then through these 3 studies, we then developed vision recommendations that had 3 themes around managing stormwater, creating resilient public spaces, and reimagining the waterfront. Did you see that change?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's unique about this study and what's unique about vision planning and why we did it with the city. One reason is to understand risks. So we analyzed these 4 climate risks of sea level rise, coastal surge, cloudburst events, and urban heat and extreme heat. And we wanted to understand what is unique about these risks in East Harlem. How do people experience them, and how does the topography and the built environment of East Harlem relate to these risks? We also wanted to explore solutions. There's when you start to look at it, there's no one solution for these risks. You need lots of solutions working together. And so part of this process was to understand, what are the kinds of solutions that you would apply in this neighborhood, and how can those solutions support other goals of improving the public realm and bringing amenity to the neighborhood. And then we also assessed the feasibility of these solutions. So working very closely with the city agencies, we looked at policy issues, considerations related to funding, constructability, overall city policy, how infrastructure is operated, to really understand, from best practices, what are the opportunities and constraints for developing them in East Harlem. And then this led to recommendations, which we'll get to at the end. And these necessarily are recommendations for how to move forward on resilience on many different fronts within the city. And then just to mention here, like what we didn't do, we didn't design capital projects. So all the kinds of things that you would do if you were designing a capital project, like surveying, geotech, environmental analysis, that was not within the scope of the project or of the study. And the aim was not to design, capital projects. We had a pretty lively community engagement process over 2018. It had several different forums. We had a project advisory committee that we met with twice. That committee involved organizations that were community-based organizations, affordable housing developers in the neighborhood, cultural institutions, health institutions. We had 2 community forums. Both of these were at DREAM. And, that was really important to the study in terms of working with the very strong network of relationships that DREAM has with families in the neighborhood and also other organizations. And then we also did quite a bit of tabling, six events in the summer of 2018. And what we did for that, we went out and really asked people about social infrastructure as well as their experience of climate change, to try to understand, how people are experiencing these issues in everyday life. Another aspect of the outreach was that we actually developed a curriculum about climate resilience and taught this curriculum at DREAM Charter School. And this was a semester-long class with 9th graders. It was actually the first cohort of high schoolers at DREAM. And it was experiential learning. We learned about mapping the neighborhood, flood risk, green infrastructure, social vulnerability, and went out and checked out the neighborhood. And this effort actually evolved, and we stayed involved with DREAM for 3 years and taught this curriculum 3 times and did projects with the students in the neighborhood that were examples of resilience and really trying to elevate, young people in the neighborhood and their voices and give them leadership opportunities around these issues. So here's the table of contents for the report. I'll just I'll walk you through what's in there. There's about 30 pages of analysis, our flood analysis and risk assessment. There's 20 pages that describe the overall vision for the neighborhood. There's about 130 pages that go into 3 conceptual projects that we studied. These were projects related to stormwater management, coastal protection, and improving public spaces. And so those are illustrated, and details about sort of feasibility and considerations for those projects are in there. There's a cost benefit analysis that's about 15 pages, and then the last 40 pages, the last appendix of the report, is a detailed costing that we did of these 3 conceptual projects. So the risk analysis it's really about defining a problem and understanding how climate change will impact the neighborhood to inform what kind of solutions to consider. And something at Star White House that we are really interested in, and we always do with projects, is we try to understand the ecological and urban and social history of wherever we're working. And it's interesting how much you learn and how much is relevant from the past about to current problems. So this is a map that probably a lot of you have seen, Eric Sanderson's Manhattan map of Manhattan. And, when we looked at this, one of the things you learn about East Harlem is that 400 years ago, before there was urban development in Manhattan, a lot of East Harlem was a low-lying tidal marsh. Can you see my hand moving around there as a cursor? Okay, so there was a tidal marsh. East Harlem also had this major creek that went through it, the Harlem Creek, that was kind of located between 106th Street and 108th Street. So this was, historically an area that would flood. And then also, because of the topography, Harlem Creek, Marcus Garvey Park, the hill there, Carnegie Hill, water historically drained through the area that is roughly 106th Street and 108th Street. And when you look at more contemporary maps, like the Villet map from the Civil War that overlaid all of these historic natural features with the grid of Manhattan, you start to see how the grid was overlaid and land was filled in, but water more or less wants to still behave the same way. It wants to absorb into an area like a marsh. It's low lying, so that's an area that will flood. And then it wants to follow the topography out to the Harlem River. Another really interesting set of maps we found that was kind of surprising was we look back at old Sanborn insurance maps that were made of the city. So the one on the left is of Thomas Jefferson Park in 1927. And then the one on the right is the same view, but in 1954 after Harlem River Drive had been constructed. And this was kind of like a revelation to find out that Thomas Jefferson Park used to connect to the river. And there was an esplanade and a direct open space connection from East Harlem to the Harlem River. But then of course, sort of decisions and plannings, mid-century New York really cut the neighborhood off from the river. And I mean, this is a real spatial equity issue that's been with the neighborhood for many years, not being able to access the river. So this was interesting to us to think about, well, in planning for resilience, how do we also address waterfront connections and, some of these spatial equity issues that we're living with. So to get into the risk analysis, we start with looking at the topography of the neighborhood, which is on the left. And what you can see is there are low-lying areas, which are the bluish, purplish areas. That's roughly where that tidal basin was. That's roughly where the floodplain is today. And there's really two kinds of profiles, like as you go from upland in Manhattan to the river in this part of the island. So this first section here, it's cut further north, closer to 145th Street. And what you can see there is that the land really slopes from west to east down towards the river in a pretty continuous way. When you look over at the second section here, which is cut kind of through the heart of East Harlem, what you notice, it's a little subtle, but the topography, it has these basins in it. So it isn't sort of like a straight slope, but rather there are these kinds of bowls where water can accumulate. So you're dealing here with both a low-lying area, but also an area that has these kinds of basins, which are really important to know about when we talk about stormwater management and drainage. In this risk assessment, we did what they call synthetic storm modeling, where we took projections from the New York City Panel on Climate Change reports in order to model two different kinds of flood scenarios, a low one and a high one. These scenarios combined projections for sea level rise, 30 inches of sea level rise by 2050. They included a cloudburst event, which is like a really fast rainstorm. And we looked at the current, it's the 5-year rainstorm. So we looked at the current cloudburst, which is 4.7 inches over 24 hours. And then we looked at the future cloudburst, which is 5.88 inches over 24 hours. And we combined that with a storm surge. In the low scenario, we looked at what is like a 10-year storm, which is kind of like a nor'easter storm today. And in the high elevation or the high scenario, we looked at the future 100-year storm, which would be something like a Hurricane Sandy. So the significance of these two elevations is, basically this low elevation of 8 feet, you're kind of looking at dealing with, high tides from flooding flooding from high tides and a lower order storm. And then the 17.5 elevation is looking at like what would be a future 100-year storm, or what would be, a future Sandy-like event or larger. And so we then produce these flood overlay maps to look at, well, what would be the inundation areas in these different scenarios. So here we're looking at the low scenarios. So on the left, the light blue is showing, well, what would be the coastal surge from a 10-year storm? And then what would be the inundation from the rainfall that we were looking at from that cloudburst event? And just a couple things to say about this is first of all, when we modeled this, we assumed that the sewer system would be surcharged. In other words, it wouldn't be working, either because of sea level rise or because the storm surge is preventing the sewer system from working, so the rainwater isn't draining out. And then the other thing just to consider is that these maps can look kind of scary, but when we're talking about the flooding from the cloudburst event, in most cases, we're talking about depths of water of like a half a foot to a foot and a half, which is still very disruptive, but it's not like 8 feet of water coming into the neighborhood. The other thing that we did with these scenarios was that we modeled them without a coastal barrier and with a coastal barrier. So like an imaginary wall that might stop the coastal surge. And this is also, you're going to see is very important to the study, is that what happens is when you create a coastal barrier, it prevents that rainwater from draining out, and it creates this bathtub effect, which is something that we studied in depth. These are looking at the overlays from the high scenarios, the future 100-year storm. And, on the left, as you can see, it's a very deep floodplain. So a future 100-year storm could flood much of the kind of central area of East Harlem from 2nd Avenue over to Lexington Avenue. And then on the right, again, is looking at, well, what if you have a coastal barrier that keeps all of that surge out, but you have that rainfall that's backing up against that wall. So I'm actually going to kind of hammer this home because it's such an important concept. The approach for providing flood protection, it's known as like creating compartments, kind of like in the hull of a big ship, where you create different sections where one can flood, but the next one is protected and doesn't flood. So in East Harlem, what we were looking at is that you'd really need 2 of these compartments, or 2 areas of like linear barriers to provide flood protection. And the reason you need 2 is because the flood wall, it needs to connect into a high elevation inland in order to prevent water from coming around it. And due to the extent of the floodplain and the elevations in the neighborhood, there's really only 3 places to do that at around 92nd Street, at 127th Street, and then at 154th Street. So to have flood protection, overall, the concept is you need compartments, but you also need tie-ins back into higher elevations. And so we were looking at 2 for East Harlem. But then the problem is once you have a barrier over the riverfront, you've created a bathtub effect, and water will back up against it, and you need to pump it out of the area. And one of the issues with that is in New York City. New York City isn't a city that really builds and maintains pumps like that. Like, we're not a city like New Orleans that historically has had a pumping system to bring water out of low elevations. And so that's a real problem that we're confronting. You can provide flood protection from coastal surge, but you also have to figure out how to deal with the rainwater and how to pump it out of the neighborhood. And then just to show this in a different way, this is like an imaginary section from the neighborhood, showing one of these basins on the left here. So if the sewer system, which is the orange line here, and the outfall, if that's not working because of sea level rise or because of surge, you're going to have water accumulate in these basins. And then what we're showing over here conceptually is that, well, if you build a barrier to keep out storm surge, you're going to have rainwater that backs up against that barrier that needs to be pumped out somehow. This risk assessment then also used GIS to quantify the risk. We looked at population, housing, subsidized housing, critical infrastructure, parks, the transportation system, to quantify under these different flood scenarios, our high and low scenarios, but then also 10-year, 50-year, and 500-year floods, what assets were at risk from flooding. We did that for both the coastal events and then also for the rain events. That risk assessment data, which basically gives you like the number of buildings that are, exposed to flooding in a 100-year event, or the number of hospitals. That data was used to calculate avoided costs, which is just another way of saying like the damages that an event would incur. And those calculations of the avoided costs supported a cost benefit analysis. Basically, a calculation of what is protected through flood protection and the value of those assets. So cost benefit analysis, it's not a tool by policy that's used in New York City for funding projects, but most federal funding agencies like FEMA or the Army Corps or HUD use cost benefit analyses to evaluate funding applications. And so we use this tool in order to begin to align, the analysis of this study with what could be, potential funding sources for projects. The methodology that was used for that, it's called HASIS, and it's a tool that's provided by FEMA. It's basically like a spreadsheet that you input different figures for buildings at risk, building contents, open space assets, et cetera. And it calculates the present value of those assets over time. So we were able to look at like a 50-year time period of potential flood events to understand, what the cost would be. There's actually a lot of detail that goes into this kind of analysis, and we needed to adapt the tool for the New York City market in terms of like prices for buildings and those sorts of things. But it also includes what you might think of as like intangibles, such as transportation delays, the cost of a business or a family having to move, mental health costs, lost productivity. So there's actually quite a bit of detail that goes into those. So this slide, it's showing some of the results of the avoided cost analysis. And one of the really important things that we noticed when we did this analysis was that the avoided costs for the low scenario, like an elevation 8 event, were about $500 million. But when you went up just one increment to a 10-year event, or like about a 10.5 elevation, that avoided costs, it almost tripled. And so what that told us was that there was actually, a real gain in a slightly higher elevation than our low elevation in terms of the assets that could be protected. The other thing that this analysis showed us in terms of the cloudburst events, which is the table on the right, is that actually the avoided costs over time of the cloudburst events, it turns out that they could actually be a lot higher than some of the storm surge events. And the reason is because they're 5-year events, and so they're projected to recur with more frequency. And so that also told us that there can be a real value to a strategy that aims to mitigate the flooding from the rain events. So, overall, in terms of the risk assessment, there were, a few big findings. I won't go through all of the bullets, but one of the big findings was this relationship between coastal protection and inland flooding from rain events, and that you can't really address one without addressing the other, and that whatever solution we need to design, those two issues need to be addressed in coordination. In addition to that, it told us that there isn't just a single solution to any of this, that it needs to be many solutions working together. And then also, because it's many solutions, that gives us opportunities to really think about how to have co-benefits with climate resilient solutions in terms of improved public space or improved community spaces. Okay, so I'm gonna, so those are kind of the big findings from the risk assessment, and I'm gonna go into the vision framework now. From the project design perspective, there's a few important ideas. One is that, we really thought about resilience in terms of urban systems, that it's not just about coastal protection, but that it's about the drainage infrastructure, transportation, public spaces, housing. So when we thought about solutions, we were considering solutions that really cross-cut across different urban systems. We were also looking for solutions that make public spaces high performance in terms of reducing urban heat and managing stormwater, and also multifunctional in the sense that a social space or a recreational space can also provide an ecological benefit or a benefit in terms of stormwater management. And then the framework, and this is kind of getting back to the table of contents and the outline of the study, is that we established these 3 themes of managing stormwater, creating resilient public spaces, and reimagining the waterfront. And then what we did to expand upon these themes is first to develop prototypes for resilient public spaces that can manage stormwater. And then we developed 3 conceptual projects. They're more kind of planning feasibility studies than like a conceptual design. One of these projects looked at the 106th Street corridor and considered how to make that into a kind of stormwater detention and conveyance corridor and an improved public space. And the 2 other projects developed ideas for a low coastal elevation solution and a high coastal elevation solution. Lastly, we looked at, how do you make this happen? What are implementation steps and policy considerations for them? So this diagram represents those 3 themes mapped into the space of East Harlem. So the vision is considering a reimagined waterfront, strategies for providing coastal protection and connecting waterfront parks to the river. It's looking at utilizing streets and public spaces for stormwater management and creating a interconnected system for stormwater management. And then it's also looking at social infrastructure in public spaces and how to make them safer and better connected, and also have these resilience functions. And in a kind of vision of the neighborhood as a community that's where parks are connected to each other, where people have access to the waterfront and also access to Central Park, where open spaces serve resilient functions. So I'll just walk through how we expanded on those three themes and the prototypes and conceptual projects. So as we talk about the first theme here, managing stormwater, there's a little more analysis that we did to better understand what's going on with the water from cloudburst events in the neighborhood. And, you know, I'd mentioned earlier before that there's these kind of two profiles. Like there's the areas of the neighborhood where rainwater basically sheet flows to the river. And then there are the areas of the neighborhood that have these basins where water can sheet flow, but it can also accumulate in these low points. And what these pink arrows are representing is essentially a pathway for the drainage where, you know, upland water might fill a low point and then spill over into the neighboring area until water fills up that low point, and then it spills over again. And in those scenarios where we were looking at cloudburst flooding in the neighborhood and those footprints, that's essentially what water would be doing. It would be starting upland, and then it would be kind of flowing from basin to basin. We did some analysis where we quantified the gallons of water in each of the catchment areas that you'd have from this kind of cloudburst flooding. So in this map, again, the blue is showing the inundation area of the rainfall event. The black are showing the different catchment areas or drainage areas of East Harlem. And then these graphs over here that we outlined, these are the calculations of the amount of water that you have in each of those. And it's a lot of water. So one of the key planning concepts in terms of managing stormwater is this idea of local buffering. How can we use green infrastructure, so like infiltration in permeable surfaces, storage under parking lots or under paved surfaces, swales, in order to capture and detain as much water of that rainwater as possible before it goes into the sewer system. Now you can, as our analysis shows, I mean, you can never really capture and store all of this water, but it's important to do as much as you can, and there's a cost benefit to it. As I mentioned before, if you have coastal protection and need to be pumping water and managing it with great infrastructure, the more water you can detain with the green infrastructure, that reduces the size of the pump that you need, and it reduces the amount of gray infrastructure that you need. And this idea of local buffering, it really implicates like every kind of surface in the neighborhood for stormwater management, capturing water off of roofs, storing that in open spaces, or storing that subsurface, also using streets and reconfiguring the right-of-way, both above ground and below ground, to capture and detain and convey water. So those are some of the ideas that this diagram is showing. So overall, you know, what this theme was looking at was first of all, how, all green infrastructure can count and have a benefit. And then if you are developing green infrastructure on a pretty big scale, how can that improve the public realm? And our conceptual project tried to tie all of that together around 106th Street. Just a kind of a side note, 106th Street it's like a really interesting street. First of all, like it was actually planned as a river to river street, and in the Manhattan plan, it was the northern boundary of Central Park. For that reason, it's extra wide. It's 100 feet wide with a 60-foot right of way, and it has a lot of the striping down the middle, kind of excess space. It also happens to be the only street in East Harlem that connects all the way from Central Park to the waterfront, because there are so many super blocks and public housing and the co-ops. It's the only continuous street, and it is in that historic area where the Harlem Creek was. So what this conceptual project looked at was, can we, what would be a model for streets for reconfiguring streets, prioritizing bus, pedestrian, and bicycles, adding landscape to the street that can serve as green infrastructure, but then also increasing the capacity of the subsurface drainage in order to hold some of that stormwater. We envisioned 106th Street as this kind of like collector with branches coming off of it. And so those branches would connect to green infrastructure that would be installed on a variety of kinds of sites, playgrounds, the open spaces and the Tower of the Park developments, parking lots, and other kinds of spaces. So this was envisioned as a system where you might have green infrastructure at Franklin Plaza, for example, or the Carver houses, and that water would be detained there, but then also drained to this new major drainage corridor. There was some study in here of, if you do this, can you prioritize buses? Can you prioritize bike lanes? And then also, can this corridor become this new kind of green space and green spine and commons that's shaded and cool and a social space for the community? So, just a couple like caveats about this study, and, like we don't have all of the solutions, yet for this. I mean, one is that, it doesn't manage, all of the stormwater. It's a partial solution. But as I mentioned, there's a benefit in this strategy in that it reduces the amount of gray infrastructure that you need. The other consideration is just like parking. Like this proposal is taking all of the parking away, about 250 spaces. And then you also have loading that, there's a couple schools on 106th Street that have bus drop-offs. And so if you're really gonna, develop this kind of approach, there are a number of transportation issues to be resolved, both with city agencies, but then also with community members and institutions. So each of the themes has a series of recommendations, and then here, this is where all the text is. That I'm not necessarily going to go through all of this, but what we tried to do with the recommendations was more or less chart out like, okay, well, what are the next steps that the city needs to be taking in terms of study and analysis and feasibility in order to start to achieve some of the goals of the theme. And so, these range from, studying potential for green infrastructure across a range of different sites, to further engineering study of large scale storage. So this will all be in there for you guys. So on to theme 2, create resilient public spaces. One of the principles of the planning was, how do you create high performance multifunctional spaces? And East Harlem and also Harlem, just has a lot of different kinds of open spaces and a lot of public spaces, parks, playgrounds, which fall into the domain of city-owned properties, but then also all of the open space around NYCHA properties, plazas that are on like the co-ops, for example, as well as parking lots. So this part of the study asked the question, well, if we're trying to create this network of green infrastructure, how do we do that in a way that also improves these public spaces and improves the social infrastructure of the neighborhood? The theme had about 9 or 10 case study sites that we looked at. I mean, no coordination was done with the owners of any of these sites. I mean, we looked at them because they were prototypical, and you could find many instances of them throughout the neighborhood. But these ranged from community gardens to apartment super block apartments that have open space and parking lots and playgrounds and other kinds of spaces. We looked at best practices from around the world for models, and then studied, at a very high level, how you might adapt these strategies for New York City sites. So this is an example of like a water square, which they build in the Netherlands. There are these kinds of hard surface recreational basins that collect stormwater and also kind of collect all of the water from surrounding roofs. So one area that we thought you might apply this idea is public housing, where you have asphalt recreational areas, whether you can lower those to an extent that they can store water in an event and also collect rainwater off of roofs, again, to keep it out of the storm sewer system. Over in Queens at the Borough Hall, they just rebuilt their parking lot that has green infrastructure. It has swales on top, but then it also has these plastic vaults underneath the parking that take all of the runoff from the parking and hold and detain it, and then either let it infiltrate into the ground or slowly release it. So we were looking at the possibility of places like the Savoy Park apartments that have these large surface parking lots, whether those could be retrofitted. Playgrounds, asphalt playgrounds and jointly operated playgrounds are another opportunity for that kind of subsurface storage. So this example is Poor Richard's Playground, which is actually one of the lowest points in one of those basins in the neighborhood. And then also the right of way. So are there opportunities again over in Denmark? Bike lanes are often constructed with a kind of conveyance channel under them to collect and store stormwater. So that was another prototype that we were looking at. So the recommendations for this theme were considering, one thing that we heard was this sort of need for multi-generational spaces. And so one idea for further study is how, when spaces are retrofitted, how we take into consideration their social use and make them more welcoming. We also thought that this network of community organizations in East Harlem could have a real role in this, where many of the organizations and institutions have facilities with small public spaces, and are there opportunities there to involve those groups and their constituents in resilience. And then also all of these strategies involve increasing tree cover in the neighborhood and addressing heat island effect from extreme heat. So then the third theme is reimagine the waterfront. This theme was studying approaches for how you elevate the waterfront. What are the opportunities of connecting to the waterfront? What are some of the implications for Harlem River Drive, since the Esplanade for much of the study area runs along the water, and then Harlem River Drive is beyond it, and then you have the neighborhood. And then are there opportunities for connecting the major waterfront parks over Harlem River Drive to the waterfront. So this slide is showing the typical condition of the bulkhead of the esplanade. The elevating the waterfront, it involves some kind of reconstruction of this bulkhead. And this is actually, this is what we're doing at the Greenway now. And then further north through that project is that we're reconstructing this bulkhead system. So you're reconstructing the bulkhead, you're either adding fill or adding some kind of structure on top of it, or you're adding a parapet in order to achieve flood protection. And the elevations range from 4.5 to 9.5 feet at the water's edge currently. High tide now is like 2.5 feet. And then in 2050, high tide's projected to be 5 feet. So one, near-term goal is, elevating the waterfront to address the high tide elevation. We did an analysis that looked at the entire waterfront and the elevations at the water's edge. And this is actually a pretty interesting afterwards diagram to inspect. This line, it's exaggerated, but it's representing the waterfront elevation. So like the low point on the esplanade is 4.5 feet here. And one of the high points is 8.5 feet. This is just south of the RFK Bridge. And when we did this, what we noticed is that most of the waterfront is between 6.5, 7, and 8 feet. So elevating the waterfront to 8 feet is not that complicated of an endeavor because you're only going up a couple of feet. That led us to think about the point I made earlier about the benefit, that the avoided costs benefit of going up to 10.5 feet. So this was another reason where, or another analysis that we did that led us to think about 10.5 as a target elevation. Since elevating to 8 or 9, just based on current elevations, is not a heavy lift. And then there's like 3 ways that you could do this over time, 3 implementation approaches, which is what this diagram is showing. One approach was the planned obsolescence approach, where basically, elevate to a low elevation now, rebuild it later, and then go to your high elevation. The second approach was what we called the adaptive capacity, which was elevate to a low elevation now, but engineer the bulkhead so that it can take the loads of like fill or structure to go to a higher elevation later, and build that later. And then the last approach was just do it all at once, like go to the high elevation today. And there's lots of reasons why, you wouldn't go to the high elevation today, related to funding, related to the constraints of the highway, et cetera. So actually what we're doing with the Harlem River Greenway design is we're doing this adaptive capacity approach. So where the average elevation of the Greenway will be 10.5 feet, some parts will be lower, some will be higher, but it's going to average at 10.5. And then Langen is engineering the reconstructed bulkhead, basically putting enough concrete in there so that at a future date, it could be elevated to a higher elevation. So we're building that adaptive capacity into the bulkhead. And that is one way that, this study is directly informing that project. Showing here that diagram of the flood compartments again, because these two conceptual projects for coastal protection, we're really looking at well, how do you build a compartment? We focused on the southern area of East Harlem just because of that had the much deeper floodplain there. But some of the things that we have to think about when we think about any kind of higher elevation on the waterfront is first of all to have a complete compartment the linear feet of it is quite extensive from 92nd Street up to 127th. The Esplanade is also very narrow in certain places. It all needs to be reconstructed. There's the adjacency to the FDR and Harlem River Drive that creates a lot of construction coordination. And then if you're elevating the waterfront, there are visual considerations as well for the road. All of the CSO infrastructure is on the riverfront. And then there's also opportunities to connect to open space. So part of this process was really getting out there, like, what is the scope for a project of this kind? What are the considerations? What's the agency coordination needed? And then we looked at it in two ways: at the high elevation that the low elevation that we first studied, and then the high elevation. So one project looked at going to 8 feet. Another project looked at how would you go to 17.5. Here we're showing how we broke it down into like a kind of kit of parts or prototypical conditions. For the low elevation, really one of the main challenges was, how do you reconstruct that bulkhead? Do you reconstruct it in a way where the bulkhead wall is still against the highway? Or do you reconstruct it in a way where you fill in that area that's under the bulkhead platform and move the bulkhead to the river? The third conceptual project was looking at the high elevation. And here we developed a more robust kit of parts, strategies for how you would elevate to 17.5. So, one approach was simply to, just elevate the Esplanade up to 17.5 and create pedestrian bridge connections over to it. A second approach was to actually remove the Esplanade bulkhead altogether and create a deck over Harlem River Drive and the FDR so that you kind of have a park space up there. And then the edge of the highway would have a wall that would be the barrier. The third approach was to look at how you could elevate parks that are adjacent to Harlem River Drive, deck over Harlem River Drive, and then elevate the Esplanade so that it becomes more of a kind of complete interconnected system. And then the fourth approach was to actually go outboard. So reconstruct the bulkhead, but create a kind of outboard levee or a soft edge that would also be park space, but could be habitat in the water. As you can imagine, all of these have major permitting implications. Anytime you're going to fill in the water or go into the water, that triggers various regulations about having to mitigate and such. So, the study looked at just a few critical points along the waterfront, really to start to understand how this kit of parts might start to be applied and what were the opportunities for connecting the street grid, connecting parks to the waterfront. So for this theme, we're kind of, in terms of the recommendations, we're kind of in the near term. The recommendation is as the Esplanade is reconstructed to elevate to a range of 8 feet to 10.5. So with the Greenway, we're going to go to 10.5. And that I should mention, that's not like going to provide flood protection for the neighborhood because it isn't the complete compartment. But what it will do is it'll protect the park up to a certain level. And so there are avoided costs there in terms of having to replace park equipment if there's a flood or that sort of thing. And then in the midterm and the long term, the recommendation is to really study the drainage infrastructure along the waterfront and what needs to be done there in terms of sea level rise. And then lastly, to continue to study full compartment and how you would elevate at the Esplanade higher to create this kind of continuous park and coastal barrier from like around 92nd Street up to 127th. Okay, so then lastly here, as I mentioned, the end of the report is cost estimation and benefit cost analysis. So we did do cost estimates for the 3 prototype projects that we looked at. Those cost estimates included construction costs. We looked at, costs of impacts to Harlem River Drive, costs of renovating open spaces. All of the bridges along the waterfront would be impacted in some way, both the pedestrian bridges and the vehicular bridges, so the costs of intervention there. And then, of course, these cost estimates include, general conditions, overhead and profit. There's escalations in there and contingencies. Those cost estimations are limited in a way because, the high level nature of the study doesn't surface, all of the unknowns that you would get into if you started to undertake projects of this kind. Okay, so I'm going to just to sort of summarize and wrap up here. So, our big takeaways, and I think it's, like if these are the lessons or the things everybody should know. First of all, it was a marsh, it was a lowland, and that ecological history is a real determinant of the flood risk today. So it's important to know about that. And climate change is going to affect the neighborhood both in terms of these increased, both from like hurricanes and coastal surge, but also from these cloudburst events and increased precipitation. And these risks, they don't care about jurisdiction. They don't care like what agency owns an open space or a building. It cuts across all of the systems, and that for that reason, all of these solutions are multi-jurisdictional and really require the consensus of agencies. And then, there's also not one solution. Like I think 106th Street is a really good example of that, where the solution for mitigating the flooding upland, it's really lots of sites that get tied together over time. And I think the way we feel about it is that like any part of that has utility and has a benefit and will be important. And these addressing these risks are in part about building infrastructure, but also just as importantly about improving the public realm of the neighborhood. And that's what we tried to show with our prototypes. And there is this, opportunity to really connect this community to the waterfront through resilience projects of these kinds. And I think to wrap up, I mean, we're at very early stages. This study got the city very far in just understanding the problem and understanding the range of solutions. It surfaced many of the kinds of policy challenges that need to be considered, and we'll need to continue to work on these projects. But really the value of the study is to start to scope out these projects, understand their extents, understand their costs, so the city is positioned to undertake them in the future. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to all of that, and I think we're looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. It was, I just feel like we received a masterclass in resiliency. I am an architect and I work with landscape architects and planners. So it's great to see the work and thought that you all have put into all of this study. And it's great to be able to share it with the committee and the community. So thank you for, listening to our concerns and requests in that way to help bring more information to help empower us as a community board to advocate for the right solutions. I'll give everyone a minute to raise their hands if they have any questions. I have a question.
Sorry, I wanted to flag that initially we had been planning to have the city agencies follow up a little bit. As we had described earlier, the consultants had delivered this as a draft to us, and then we went through a process of reviewing it. I recognize that, that was a really thorough and lengthy presentation. So I guess a question for you and the board on how you want to do that. Do you want us to follow up with, how we took into consideration the concepts and proposals that were in this report and sort of how the feasibility and vetting on the agency side went? Or do you want to just jump straight to questions?
No, that would be great. And this, as comprehensive, I know there are a lot of agencies and they probably all have a lot of different opinions about that. So
Yeah. So I'll start. Thanks so much. We'll try not to take too long. I will also try to share screen and just refer, just as reference. So this is what Michael was just going through. And I think for folks who have seen our vision report, we actually do include the same diagram. The final vision plan is a lot, it's more public facing, it's more summary language, less of the technical details. And we're happy that we had an opportunity to bring the team in to talk you through all of those details today. But I think in particular, the overall framework of the vision plan that folks may have seen and that we've talked through in last February and the year before, still focuses on managing stormwater, creating resilient public spaces, and then we changed the terminology for the waterfront to adapt the waterfront, but same buckets of recommendations. But the managing stormwater, we really ended up focused on and recommending a more general look at stormwater management at a number of sites. Our plan does emphasize East 106th Street, but we also identified a couple of other major right-of-way. I might invite folks from DEP and DOT just to share a little bit about, how they think about, challenges and issues that need to be considered when we're thinking about sites. I'm not sure who from DEP is on deck, and maybe if you can introduce yourself, your name and your role at DEP before you speak, that would be great.
Hey, Ken, since it's a pretty specific question to siting, do you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself and give the answer for her? It's a pretty specific question for you.
Sure, Michael. Hi, this is Kenneth Lamb. I work at DEP in the Coastal Resiliency Coordination Unit. As we're reviewing some of these concepts, some of our main concerns were constructability issues, O&M access to our existing infrastructure, as well as what other conflicts you might run into when you're proposing some of these, for example, on East 106th Street, you have a GI, then you have these additional pipes above our existing combined sewers. So when you put all that infrastructure in there, first of all, space is an issue, right? We all know there's subway lines that crosses a couple of these avenues, and I believe there's a Metro North line somewhere on, was it Park Avenue or one of those other avenues? But basically, those were our key concerns, and whether or not it's really buildable. And when you do build them, our sewers are based on gravity flow, right? So you have this specific design criteria that these sewers have to follow. DEP have a drainage plan design criteria that, the sewers has to meet a certain slope, has to have a certain velocity so that you don't collect sedimentation, create more O&M, within the pipes themselves for the agency. So, those were some of our key concerns based on this specific concept.
Yeah, I'm Michael Deloach. I'm Deputy Commissioner of Public Affairs at DEP. I will say we did benefit a lot from this analysis, and obviously there are some really real challenges facing the city in the future, all across the city, not unique to East Harlem. And so, we do have a lot of tools in our toolkit to sort of help address this. They're not all gonna, they're not all fully effective in managing such large storms that are coming in the future. But whether it's constructing new high-level storm sewers. We have new blue belts we're doing. We've been doing, we've added 10,000 assets of green infrastructure across the city. We're spending and doing a lot of projects to help do this. And like I said, this work that went into this has been really helpful in showing sort of the realities on the ground in East Harlem and help us think through what can work. And while there are definitely challenges that, were referenced in this presentation, whether it be parking or interference with, other utilities, space and general cost, we definitely want to continue to work towards manageable solutions for real challenges that are coming, in the future.
Thanks so much, Ken and Mike. John, did you want to chime in a little bit with?
Well, yeah, sure. And Michael did a really fantastic job. I had forgot the part about 106th Street was supposed to be the top of Central Park. But there's a lot of really key structural things that happen there on 106. And like Michael said, it's the only river to park, at least through street, and it's two ways. So when in the master report, what you see on the screen now that you first were shown, that was originally shown on 106th Street, and it comes to me as a draft, and I'm responsible for pointing out the transportation issues, and Michael alluded to them in the report, to take the space that you see as just the black roadway and make that the only roadway. It required getting rid of the 200 and something parking spots that he said. And then basically the water conveyance goes where the yellow lines are. And it's true, for driver safety, we want people to go, 25 miles an hour or less. We want them to stay in the lines, and that's where the cars are supposed to go under normal circumstances. We're all New Yorkers. We know that when the FedEx van comes, you might have to pass. So if this was a water conveyance, that couldn't happen. And then, most importantly, and we deal with the fire department a lot, and they represent the ambulance folks as well, as I'm sure you know. If you're backed up in traffic for whatever reason, FedEx, and there's a fire truck is allowed to go through the yellow stripes to get to the fire. The ambulance is allowed to go through the yellow stripes. And, so we had to flag that if there were literally, we call it a cattle chute, just one lane in each direction, then we wouldn't even have that relief for like emergency vehicles. And it's not a street where we could imagine that there wouldn't be a need, because it is in fact the only street that goes through, like we said, until 116th. And then I think DEP just basically mentioned it, but I'm sure everyone's also seen the street construction. And aside from the water and sewer, obviously every company, the electric company, cable company, various telephone companies, the gas company, all their infrastructure is also under everybody's street. And so they would just limit the amount of space below. And Ken was referring to it as a maintenance issue, but you can't put one utility here and then another one directly under it, because then it's like a multi-layer sandwich to try to get down to the utility below the utility. What we do is put it in channels across the street. So the idea of having electric under plumbing, with gas at the bottom, that's not something that's workable. And then again, if all of that was under the one travel lane, changing one gas line. Now, if we had to change one gas line, we would give them instructions to have the traffic go around. If it becomes physically impossible, then one little service problem would also, close off this street.
Thanks. Thanks so much, John, for talking through that. I think what we wanted to share with folks is that, this is sort of part of the process when we receive these sorts of ideas and proposals. And I think without the team sharing a proposal like this, we wouldn't actually delve into, okay, well, what might the site constraints be? And so this is part of the process when we do planning and visioning. And our final vision plan had a less street specific recommendation, although we did mention 106th Street and some of the other major right-of-way as, areas that could and should continue to be looked at. We just didn't emphasize this particular corridor as much, given some of the concerns that we started to understand from agencies as we reviewed these in more detail. I think the next one that I'll briefly touch on is just the longer term waterfront coastal protection, which I'm sure folks have interest in. I'm just gonna jump to this. I might defer to folks at maybe Jordan and folks at MOR just to speak a little bit more about how we think about and consider long-term or high-level coastal protection projects.
Sure. Thanks, Alda. So, I think, very appreciative of the kind of different designs. I think, the main point here is that, we have been making progress on kind of the near term side. The long term, these are all gigantic moves. There's kind of no half measures here. Even options A, B, and C, in some respects, the kind of on land ones are, involve kind of dramatic changes to the built environment. D, the outboard solution, we talked about the kind of limitations from a regulatory standpoint. The kind of current framework is one that, going out into the water is really not acceptable. That is a conversation that's happening in Lower Manhattan, and certainly one that, the city expects to be having in the future. But the last 40, 50 years of environmental regulations are such that, that's just not a conversation that the DEC and the Army Corps are open to. So, I think it's big, bold response to a big, bold problem. Also, just kind of one other note, this is incredibly, not unexpected, but, very, very expensive solutions. And certainly, back in 2018, 2019, the federal climate in the kind of funding for these projects was very different. If you've been following the news the last few days, there's kind of a new set of opportunities for the city. I think we are learning, just as you are, what those kind of might look like. And certainly there's a kind of a brighter future in terms of coordination on kind of big moves like this. And I think it's partnership that's been lacking. And I think we're kind of looking forward to having those conversations.
So much, Jordan. I don't know if other agencies wanted to chime in at all. If not, I may recognizing what time it is, we can pause here for questions. But thank you for letting us speak a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's great to have the team of different agencies here to hear about the challenges and things that they think might be successful. So again, please raise your hand if you have any questions or comments. My question is, Jordan, you just mentioned that there would be, these longer term projects are going to have large scale implications in the built environment. So I'm just wondering if there's any benefit to taking any sort of a piecemeal approach to these improvements and, as renovations to streets or like, for example, the 2nd Avenue subway are implemented. Can we bake in some of those resiliency strategies into those moves since they're already needing to be occurring?
Absolutely. And I think, this was covered in kind of one of the final takeaways. And I think something that we knew through the process, but really kind of cemented through this work is that, resiliency is not any one thing. It is not kind of a wall at the water. It's not kind of a giant pump station. It's in kind of all of our decisions moving forward in kind of how we think about our streets, our sidewalks, wherever we can find opportunities and kind of embedding. You see kind of the agencies here tonight. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so I think it's kind of not in either or. I think it's truly, we do need to kind of make the big, bold moves that are kind of challenging and require kind of collaboration across the board, but we also kind of in every smaller decision, in a sense, kind of need to embed resiliency.
Great, thank you. And then, we, for example, have a development going on at 111th and 112th Streets on Madison Avenue that's requiring to go into the, the sewer systems and introduce a larger system for the increased density in that area. Would 2-block rate, projects be considered too small to do any sort of implementation of a strategy? Or, I understand that there's space limitations for like bioswales and things like that, but is there a way to introduce like permeable, pavement or, anything that we can do in these sort of small scale projects? So
I'm not familiar with that specific development. Are you talking about potentially, storage and what specific sort of things?
It's Sendero Verde. It's a Jonathan Rose company's project, but I guess, it's such a big building. It's going to be a huge building and there's going to be a lot of density. So they need to increase the capacity of the sewer systems there.
So Jordan, maybe I could talk
I don't know who was best to answer.
Yeah. So we're actually at DEP finalizing our unified stormwater rule, which is going to create additional capture quantities for new developments or redevelopments. It's being finalized right now. We're about to go through CAPA for the rulemaking. So that will have a significant improvement to new development, sort of avoiding surcharging the system. We're just finalizing it now. I don't know specifically there. I do know that East Harlem has a lot of issues with green infrastructure. There's a lot of high bedrock. There's limitations with space. There's a lot of challenges. We did a sort of a citywide review for our green infrastructure program. And again, a lot of Manhattan faces challenges that we don't see in some of our other boroughs. So it's not as easy necessarily as just putting in an infiltration basin or a rain garden, but the stormwater rule will really make a big impact for developments like you're discussing now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, everyone on this committee knows how we ask year to year on our statement of district needs for simple things like adding additional street trees and green infrastructure, and it gets turned down every time. So I'm just curious, my last question is all of this working together with the Where We Live draft plan and the Resiliency for All reports? They both pinpoint East Harlem as needing equitable investment in these areas, and I just want to know what the relationship was between those.
Yeah, so you're referring to the kind of climate justice. Yeah, so we are all part of the same family. We used to sit together when sitting together was possible. This work, did wrap up in a sense, back in 2018, 2019. So I think kind of carries on the legacy, but certainly, I think there are kind of through lines throughout. Certainly, our focus on social resiliency here is kind of the one of the big connections, because there are physical risks, and that's something that we are mitigating against. But it's kind of beyond that, and it's thinking about how we convene in the event of kind of emergencies and kind of our the strength of our connections, and making sure that that's something that we build upon, and that is that's part of that work as well, and we'll certainly carry on the legacy of this work as well.
Yeah, I'll pass it over to our land use consultant, George James.
Awesome, thank you. And Jessica, I have a lot of things I can ask, and you will cut me off when I'm going on too long.
Sounds good.
All right. So I just want to say, Michael, this was amazing. There was so much information, and you've clearly, you have mastered this topic. And I feel like we did get a master class in resiliency, and it was specific to East Harlem, which is what everybody in this room needs to hear, right? This was great, and I think everybody feels, or at least I do, I feel so much more informed by this. So thank you, and thanks to Parks, and thanks to the city for Jordan to making this happen. And I'm looking very forward to reading the small print in your deck. But okay, so I'm going to summarize. You know, I'm going to start high and then go down. So the risk here is the risk in East Harlem is high, right? It has to do with topography and geography, but there's a high risk when we compare it to other places in Manhattan. But the solutions are complicated, right? The solutions, you know, the bathtub effect, the fact that, you know, you just can't build a big wall and protect. It's like the wall can actually, you know, do damage with certain flooding events. But the risk is high, but the solutions are complicated. I guess, you know, for people who live in the neighborhood who understand that their risk for disruption and flooding events is high, I think there's going to be like you know, and they're seeing all of these other resiliency measures going into effect right now, like big, large-scale resiliency measures. And in, you know, East Harlem, there's going to be a flood wall around Metropolitan Hospital. You know, no one lives at Metropolitan Hospital, right? And so, you know, if you want to protect your home and where you live and where you go to school, it's like, you know, there's really not much happening here. And I guess, is that right? If the risk is high, and yeah, should there be something happening either now or relatively soon in the future to mitigate that risk? Anybody?
Yeah, no,
who's the question for?
it's a great question. It's the $1 million question, and I you know, appreciate it because you know, I think I would argue that you know, something is already happening, right? And I think that was the you know, the purpose of the last meeting, is to go over, you know, the kind of new money for the Esplanade and Pier 107, you know, the park that's coming online. You know, we've talked a little bit about you know, some of the DEP rulemaking. There's the climate resiliency design guidelines, which just became law. If you're not familiar, it's essentially kind of any new city structure needs to be built in a way that's more resilient. And so I think that goes back to kind of the you know, my prior point. It's less about any one thing, but it's everything. And so I you know, I understand that that's you know, not always the easiest thing to sell, and the kind of silver bullet you know, thing is you know, more appetizing. But I think we can do both. And you know, I think alluding to the, you know, my prior point of, you know, openness at the federal level to engage on projects like this, which was not the case a couple of years ago,
right,
which may be the case now for a couple of years. We'll see. But you know, it was not a conversation that, you know, and the scale of which is really, you know, is not a problem that the city by itself can solve. You know, these are multi-billion-dollar projects.
But okay, so let's build on what you're saying there. So we heard about the $284 million for the rebuilding the Esplanade. But we don't know a lot of details about that, right? You know, so we just heard from Michael about how the Esplanade could be rebuilt in a number of different ways. Is that money going to be spent essentially just fixing the deferred maintenance that has happened on the Esplanade, or will it be designed in such a way to add to the resiliency of the neighborhood? It's just not clear. I don't think anybody said anything about that. And I, you know, personally, I think, you know, my worry on these things is always, you know, the city spends $100 million, spends an enormous amount of money, and then rips it out 5 years later because, you know, there's another plan that's going in there. And we don't want to see that, right? You don't ever want to see that. You want to see an investment to protect, and, you know, to improve the Esplanade, but also to protect the neighborhood. And, you know, is that the plan for this money? And what if it is, what you know, what design is it going to follow in terms of what Michael has shared?
So this is Laura. Sorry, I just wanted to address a few of these things. You know, assuming that the city could get more money for the Esplanade to make it higher, bigger, better, stronger, we would still have this inland bathtub flooding effect, which is a really much more in a way, more complicated situation, because you have this water that's been there historically, as we showed, and where is it going to go? It's going to go into a spongier street. So that means the parking spaces or the travel lanes or something there that's asphalt has to become more absorptive, right? It means that maybe these buildings, as the new buildings start, have to store even more water. Like they have to have bluer roofs that store more water on the roofs, or detain more water in the basement. So there's private property that has to adapt. There's all these NYCHA campuses that have to get in the game, which they've already started to do, partly in response to our report. There's the RFP out for the water square, which, you know, would store a lot of water, and those things really work, but you need more than one of them. So that's a demonstration. So that's like the start. You know, that there has to be very broad community awareness, which is why when we did the study, we partnered with the Dream School as our community partner, because we thought, well, we're going to experiment and put a drop in the bucket of educating the community with these ninth graders and just see, does that drop create a ripple into their parents, into their aunts and uncles, and will people start talking about resiliency in a new way? Because for the city agencies to have the courage to come back to the community board and say, we're taking away 200 parking spaces to deal with flooding, that's a big deal to come to the community board. It may not be a big deal to come to this committee and say that. And I'm speaking from the point of view of being on this committee in Community Board 1 in Lower Manhattan, and we're all happy to get rid of cars on the Environmental Protection Committee, but you go to our Transportation Committee and, you know, it's like they've got the guns out. So, you know, so there's some work that the community board can also be doing in parallel to the political changes that have to happen in the city, to have the leadership, to bring the agencies together, to, you know, make the kind of integrated decisions that really have to happen to tackle these challenging problems.
Well, I agree. I think everything that you're saying is right, but I still don't know how that $284 million is going to be spent, right? And
Yeah.
I don't.
Hi. I can chime in on that. We were here, I'm losing track of which month we're in. I think it was the March meeting when we were giving an update. So that money is, you know, we're getting the scope worked out and getting that, you know, it takes us a while to get things into procurement and get them moving because we're the city and we have a lot of process. But the plan for that is that we will be following, you know, pretty much that diagram that Michael showed you with the elevations, and elevating to a height that is an appropriate height for this area, so as to not create the bathtub, but to go up a little bit. So it would have some amount of protective element from low level storms, but without creating another problem that's harder to solve, which is the interior flooding. So, and we'll be back to the community board all throughout that process as that project advances through procurement and then into design. So you'll hear a lot more about it as we go.
So that's kind of like the adaptive solution that Michael talked about, where you start low and then you.
Right, talking about the near term, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to mention just a little more detail on that. I mean, it's the cost of putting in a little more concrete to like the cost versus the cost of like ripping stuff out and reconstructing it. You know, it's like marginal. So like putting more concrete in there within these a budget of that size, it's negligible. So I mean, it makes it feasible to do when we're elevating the esplanade to these mid-level heights.
I'm thrilled to hear that there's a connection there, right? That's going to happen. Doesn't always happen that way. Can I continue, Jessica?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
This is important.
So, you were saying that New York City is not like New Orleans, where there's this tradition of pumps, because, you know, New Orleans is, you know, parts of it are below sea level, right? And there's constant pumping and isn't it true though that there are parts of New York City where there are pumps that pump to keep the groundwater, you know, that lower the groundwater, like in southeastern Queens, right? I mean, they're.
I think it's a question for DEP. I'm definitely not an expert on the cities where the city has pumps.
My understanding is, and maybe the wrong people here, but the Queen's office is not in the room. But my understanding is that that there are pumps in southeastern Queens that, keep there's a very high water table, and they pump to lower the water table, and they pump during storm events. Am I wrong about that?
Ken, do you want to opine on that? I mean, it's minimal, but yes, there is some pumping, but not anywhere near the scale of what we're talking about in this presentation.
Right. Okay. All right, but wouldn't I guess maybe my question is that you've kind of put out here, Michael, this, well, we can't put a wall up because we have the bathtub effect. And that's a problem. And well, I guess we could store the water, but then we're hearing from the city, well, we can't really store the water because of all these infrastructure issues. Well, it seems that the solution then is to look at what other cities do, which is essentially use pumps. Or I mean, what do you think of that? Am I being crazy, or is that something that might work?
Were you asking that too?
I was asking it to Michael because he's the guy that seems to be the master of East Harlem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this is one of these many issues that like our study surfaced. As we develop solutions, we're essentially scoping all of these different problems, from like parking spaces to pumping, that need to be resolved, that have different stakeholders and different owners. And so like, as the city's looking at resilience in, coastal neighborhoods throughout all of the boroughs, like this is a question that's coming up, and this is a debate that will need to be sorted out one way or another, and that will give inflection to the types of solutions that the city's gonna see to address coastal flooding.
And I would just add one point here, that this Mayor's Office of Resiliency has been working very closely with DEP on a citywide stormwater study post Hurricane Harvey and kind of the tremendous amount of rain in a very short period of time there. City was like, we need to take a look at specifically intense rain events and the impacts across the city. And so that's work that's ongoing. I think we should be seeing some of the stormwater maps later this year, as well as some potential mitigation solutions connected to that. Because I think shown through kind of our study area and how it had to expand, all of these kind of the drainage networks are connected in ways that it does require holistic solutions, some of which kind of expand beyond any one community board.
Great. All right, so not this committee, but this community board sees all these applications come through. There's a lot of stuff happening in East Harlem, and there's they make a lot of requests from applicants that come through, and a lot of it has to do with local hiring or other issues that are really important to the community. And not once, never, has somebody asked about green infrastructure or at least as far as I remember, green infrastructure or storing stormwater or anything beyond the statutory requirements that they have to go through. My hope is that you all see the community board as your partner in this, and what can the community board do to help? Because y'all don't live here. I don't live here. It's the other people on this committee who do, right? It's their homes, and it's in their interest to help to see the little things like, let's get more, tree pits for more, more areas for permeability, whatever it is. What should the land use committee or this committee be asking applicants that come in front of it to help?
I think that's one thing about this study that's really special when Parks and MOR set it up, is that it's a social and a physical resilience study. So, when the community asks for more parks or more green space or more places to sit, each one of those should be coupled with a way to absorb water or a way to educate people about these issues, to somehow spread the word so that the community is, so there's like this whole culture of resilience that is in the vocabulary everywhere, the way Black Lives Matter is, and equity, and all these, ask for money that you're the schools and this and that. Like the resiliency has to be part of that. And the two are actually really related to each other. And, the thing that our study was predicated on is that the better the outdoor social network is, the more people will be encouraged to get out of their apartments and meet people and be on the street and get outside and get fresh air. That builds community. And then there's a network of people. And so that reduces the isolation that is really fatal if you're an elderly person in a walk up during a heat wave or a flood and nobody even knows you're there. So we're really trying to weave the social connections together with this issue of resilience.
Yeah, well, and George, I'll just kind of like describe some experiences and just things that we heard. Like when we started this study, it was a year and a half after the East Harlem neighborhood plan and the rezoning, and so there was already so much engagement around that, and when we talked to family members from Dream and talked to the CBOs, and people in East Harlem they're dealing with like hunger, they're dealing with like violence in the neighborhood, and so now we have this resilience plan, and it's like, okay, here's like another thing, like how do I get this, capture somebody's attention with this, and I think what we found is, people really use the social spaces that are close to them. People in public housing, they use the social spaces that are like right outside the door. If like the Health Action Center, University Settlement is across the street, or the library, that's where people are. And that's the environment people are interacting with. And like the more we can show kind of nature in those spaces, the more we can make them high performance, and people see that like this is a change happening in the neighborhood. Like the more effortless it becomes for people to be aware of climate change and engage in these issues. So I kind of building on what Laura says, like these spaces are really, really important to people, and it's kind of where they get their awareness of what's happening in the neighborhood.
I think that's why we were so struck, like I worked in Central Park when I began my career. I redesigned the Harlem Mirror that you see today. So I've spent a lot of time up in this, low-lying area. And, when I went back up there and saw 106th Street, that is so wide. There is so much pavement there, and I've never seen a lot of traffic there. And it just seemed like, oh my God, we're talking about all of this water falling in a cloudburst and just going on like acres of paving. Like when I walk around East Harlem, there is so much unneeded paving. And just to start to tackle that, and of course it's all owned by somebody. It's DOTs, or it's parks, or it's landlords, or it's HPDs, or the schools, or whatever. Like it's all claimed by somebody. So but literally everybody, I think, is going to have to rethink, where do we really have to have impervious surfaces, because you can just see the problem when you walk around.
All right, George, I probably have to cut you off here to bring it over to Xavier, but thank you so much for all of your questions. And if you have any more, I would love for you to send them so that we can continue the conversation. Thank you. Xavier, our vice chair.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And George, no love lost, massive amount of respect, because one of the few men on this board who can read my mind like a steel trap. It's kind of crazy. So he's asked a lot of questions. So I'm going to get it to the human level. I've walked the streets. I've been in the field during the best times and the worst times. and I hear everything that's been relayed, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to start, Laura, right?
Yes.
So, and I appreciate everything. And I'm sorry, I messaged Jessica. I have 2 dogs, so I love animals. I love seeing the dogs out. Unfortunately, mine were very naughty and knocked my mint tea onto my laptop. So it's dead, and I'm now on my phone, which yeah, it's not able to work. So let's talk about how this real world impact will affect the neighborhood, because I'm looking at pragmatically, because I live on 102nd between Park and Lex, right at the top of the hill. It looks like it was transplanted from San Francisco, which is out of the plane.
Good move.
Well, no, I've been there for ages, raising the 5th generation with roots here. So let's talk brass tacks about how this will impact, and how, when we talk about when I believe it was Michael Deloach talked about the pump stations that George referenced, we don't have enough, and there's been a preference. And in this neighborhood, it's not just with this issue, but with many issues affecting our neighborhoods, whether it's as most currently is vaccination, to even with this issue of resiliency, we have been on the short end of the stick. And I think that it's being rightfully called out, and better times, I would call a spade more bluntly. How can we get those resources into our community to make sure we preserve this neighborhood? Because they don't have the resources fiscally. We don't have the infrastructure to preserve it. And in the severe crises, which in my vocation, we have to plan from A to Z and back again to prevent all problems. So what would you recommend? I'd like your comment on that. And before I go to both Michael Haggerty and Michael Deloach.
Wait, who are you addressing this to? Me?
To you first, and then I will pivot to Deloach and Haggerty.
Okay, so you are asking how to get the resources that East Harlem needs to survive climate change. Is that what you're asking?
Where we are now and to climate change, all of it, soup to nuts.
Wow, that's a big question.
But it's what the community needs to know.
I mean, I'm optimistic because we have a president who understands climate change, who is on the front page trying to raise all this infrastructure money. And, it seems like this is the moment. And also there's a big emphasis on trying to be much more equitable with where the money goes. So I would say, with all those factors, East Harlem would be the ideal demonstration project of what we're reading in the news. That this is getting federal money is not my area of expertise, but it seems like now would be a time to make a move for it and to somehow leverage this plan where there's a lot of good information and really get serious about what we need to do to address this water situation.
Michael Haggerty.
Yeah, I did like one of these Zoom campaign meet and greets with Sean Donovan a couple of weeks ago. I actually asked him the same question. And so, what I thought what he had to say about it was pretty smart. He had to say, if I'm mayor, resilience is going to be like a lens over, everything that we do, from placing a curb or planting a tree up to, building a park or building a coastal barrier. And I think it's a good way to think about it. Like our study, I think in a way tried to approach resilience in that way, to really think about how you apply it across scales. And as the community board is looking at projects, things that are happening at private developments, what's happening with different city city facilities, it's just always asking that question, is like, how are we making it resilient? Like, what's it mean here? I mean, I don't think I'm answering your question, or Sean is answering your question about how exactly to get the resources to pay for it. But like, it starts when resilience is this other lens that we consider everything through. And I mean, it's, as you know, East Harlem is a neighborhood where we have to do that.
And also, you
So,
know,
hold on, sorry, just real quick, and I appreciate the acknowledgement that it's not answering the question. I'm asking as partners, let's answer that question. Let's find the answer. That's what I'd like to hear.
Yeah.
So if we can, in this dialogue, find that, we'll be accomplishing a lot. So go on. Sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to say that
before I forget the thought.
You know that our study, we're showing that the risk of doing nothing is a lot of money. So it's definitely, by any way you look at it, a good investment to address the flooding issues. So we just have to find the right political channels and the right way to get that money, because our cost benefit analysis should make it quite ripe for some good funding.
Oh, no disagreement. An ROI or a lost leader and all that's not lost on me. I think the real risk is that just saying the optics are, what can we push off? So I that's where concern will be, is because, do we have to deal with it right now, or do we have to be crisis intervention care with it? That's where we have been dealing with it in this community. From an institutional perspective, is that's what we've been dealing with. It's reactionary versus, okay, we can prevent this, and that is historically the case. So real quick, thank you, Jessica, for letting me go on. So back to the pumps with Queens versus our community. I'd like to hear some comment on that. That would be from Michael Deloach. Please,
yeah,
sir.
I mean, I have to be frank. I'm not the pump expert at DEP, unfortunately. So I can get folks that are working on, we do have pump stations. We've been looking at some with some of the Staten Island resiliency projects. I know ESCR, there's a lot of work going into it. So there is a lot of work happening at DEP. They're not, an easy solution to everything. They are big, they are costly to operate and maintain. There's lots of challenges, but I can definitely have somebody that's better versed in the nuance of pumps and why we need more and what that means. I don't know, Jordan, I don't know if you want to add anything specifically, but I unfortunately won't be able to give too much more color on it at this point.
Jordan?
Yeah, I think, Jordan, if you don't have anything to add, I think it's fair that we can follow up with this via email and in future conversations. So we have a list of questions, and I know George has outstanding questions. So, and if anyone has comments or questions that they didn't feel they were able to bring up, I see Debbie, you brought your hand up. So I'll let Debbie go, and then we'll move on to the next
All right.
topic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not gonna go deep and hard and fast. I'm just gonna be specific. And I think that, statements that say, East Harlem, people are dealing with so many things, and we know that. And that's why we stand here in these meetings to be champions for those folks. And with that said, I'd like to just say, I think it's important that we get the highest, best quality choices in a way that is implemented so that people in the community really understand what the benefit is for them, in a way that educates them to understand that these transformations of a community are occurring, but it's not to kick you out, it's to make sure that you stay. Because, Laura, I remember you many years ago because I was on the board. And I remember a lot of the work in Central Park, it was really interesting to see the transformation of space, with the lack of community education in a way that empowered folks to understand that the transformation was occurring. So I just wanted to reiterate the importance of that. I can also, speak to the fact of George when he said that with all of the projects that have come, never once was green, water, anything it was always about jobs. So maybe that's something we could look at moving forward, which is really important.
Great. Thank you all so much. This was really, it's been great to go through this process with all of you and to be able to voice our concerns as a community board, to be heard, and then to get the response and to be educated along the way. So we understand there's a lot of challenges. It's a very complex problem. Those are my favorite types of problems. So I look forward to seeing you back in the committee and at the, in other committees. I know transportation would love to hear from you, but I think what Laura mentioned about committees, the community board working together internally to build consensus, to build community consensus, and then also the city agencies working together. Those are all really important considerations that will need to keep going on in the background in order for us to be able to successfully implement anything in the future. And we look forward to hearing about your suggestions and projects that are going to be incoming that will hopefully feed into this study and the necessity of responding to these climate challenges over time. So thank you all for being here, and we'll move on to our committee discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. So I know it's late. We have one more item to discuss, which is about the environmental justice for all. So it goes hand in hand. There was a draft letter regarding the environmental justice for all report. So I know there was, we had a working document that we had listed a few elements that we would like to see the environmental justice report include and address. So we've listed those out here. As I think it's important that we vote on this tonight, because the public comments are due at the end of the month. So we would need to get it approved by full board before submitting public comment, and we want to make sure we do that before the deadline. So Carly, do you, I don't know, did everyone get a chance to read the letter, and are there any comments? If I'm just going to open the floor for discussion. I can read it aloud if that would be helpful. I don't really want to do that.
I think just highlighting this part.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think this is the most, thank you, Carly. I think that's the most important part, because, we can choose to add or delete things, reword at least the specific, items in this list. So I'll just read it out. Manhattan Community Board 11 would like the environmental justice report and plan to consider and address the following resiliency and climate justice concerns and opportunities in East Harlem. 1, interior drainage. We just talked a lot about that. 2, waterfront resiliency, necessary, both of them. 3, resiliency interventions planned in conjunction with the infrastructure work required for the 2nd Avenue subway extension. 4, addressing flooding issues in parks, which we talked about last meeting. 5, addressing issues of extreme heat. Addressing pollution issues. Provide for the permanent relocation of the sanitation garages as prescribed by the East Harlem Points of Agreement. We have more to say about that later. Provide increased sanitation services, provide additional street trash cans, provide more frequent, I think it should say more frequent sanitation or trash pickup. Thank you, Carly. Provide vacant lot cleaning, address the responsibilities of absentee landlords in regards to sanitation concerns. I think those two go together. So I wonder if 12 can be a bullet of 11. And that 9 and 10 could be a bullet of 8. Sorry. 11, implement street trees. Just talked about that. Sorry, 11 again. Implement pervious concrete on roads and sidewalks. Implement bioswales and hardscaping and roadways. And 13, consider traffic and car pollution and safety. How does everyone feel about this list? Debbie gave a thumbs up.
I have just one thought where address flooding issues in parks. Would it make sense to word it as The flooding issues in parks is essentially the infrastructure, the drainage system. It's not just that there's water collecting, it's the infrastructure. Is there some way to word that?
Yeah. So the
Flooding and drainage.
flooding and drainage infrastructure in parks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I see Diane has her hand up. Go ahead, Diane.
So my question is, or actually what I think is missing here, and we're so used to it that we forget about it. It's the smoke coming from the train, the elevated train that we have in our community, Metro North.
Yep.
So has everyone noticed that, or you completely forget about it because it's there?
All I can do is hear it.
Yeah, but the train itself, actually there's smoke coming out of the diesel train, the first train.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that is, but when you talk about air quality, we're impacted by that.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we could make 2 sub bullets under here, including the Metro North train line, and then secondarily the highway convergences.
And help me understand what the bioswales and hardscaping is. What is that specifically? I know what bioswales are.
Yeah. So we talked about it a little bit with the presentation that we just had. You know, I think pervious. I think Laura mentioned sponginess of the roads and sidewalks, and so whether that's collecting things on the roof, or it's collecting them on green spaces on the roads, or if it's like specific pervious concrete that allows the water to be funneled into like a draining and collection thing underneath the streets.
What about within the tree pits that we have currently?
The what?
The tree pit.
Understand you.
I'm sorry, I probably having problems with my audio on my
Okay. Manage.
tree pit.
Tree pits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, I think more tree pits and more trees would be that's one of the items here. Implement street trees.
Right, but I'm saying bioswales with those trees in the tree pits.
Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. Implement tree. In hard, okay, so maybe we can write implement bioswales and hardscaping roadways and
hardscaping roadways and green streets
and softscaping.
Oh, okay.
I think Vinny's doing that right now in Staten Island, and they're doing it in the tree pits.
And then, yeah, maybe you could just put in parentheses, i.e. tree pits.
I just, going back to the first point Diane made about air quality, I'm wondering if we should put 13, like the traffic car pollution, if we should add that as a sub bullet.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're talking about put that with Metro North?
Yeah.
Charlie? Oh, I see what you did.
Yeah. I was just gonna put because we had a traffic car pollution one. I was gonna put it with this little bucket where we're talking about air quality and pollution.
Yeah.
What about, and I think Debbie, you can speak a lot to this. I don't see it in here. The runoff of the water, particularly in the arches. Do I see that anywhere on there?
No. Yeah, water.
Debbie.
Huh?
The runoff, the rain runoff in the arches.
Main water runoff in the arches.
Yeah, it's a problem, especially in the wintertime when they freeze up. Have we addressed that ever?
I'm sorry, were you asking me something? It's hard to understand you for some reason. Maybe my speaker.
No, it could be mine too. I've been having problems too. Jessica, could you repeat it, please? Did you understand what I said?
Yeah, I can understand. Can you just repeat it one more time for me? I'm so sorry.
I understood her. I can
Okay.
repeat it.
Okay, thank you,
I heard
Connie.
Diane. I can repeat
All right,
it.
I'll let
She
Connie.
she was asking about and Diane, correct me if I'm wrong, the arches that are under the Metro North, the leakage there. Correct, Diane? Is that what you're asking about?
Okay. Were you asking something? Me? Something?
You.
Okay, what were you asking me? I don't know.
You agree that that is an environmental issue to run.
Yes, yes. Okay, yes. Okay. A long time ago, there was a plan to do a whole renovation it was called the Chapels of Luminous, where it was by Fernando Salicru, where they were going to be reinforced, and then art was going, like lights were supposed to go in them and stuff. It was called the Chapels of Luminous. So, and also to improve safety.
Yep.
If you want a rendering of it, I got it.
But mostly it's about the runoff underneath the arches.
Yeah, absolutely, because you have the ice that comes down, the icicles that form that really can, fall and hurt someone.
That's pretty dangerous.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Debbie.
All right, where could we put that on here? Perhaps.
That could be interior drainage. You put it as a bullet point.
Yeah, it's not necessarily interior drainage though. If it's runoff from the train, like above, right? I would just add a 13th point that mentions the consider runoff water and leaching, I guess.
Right, and we're not the only one asking about this, Jessica. It would also be any elevated train.
Right.
This is it.
Oh, beautiful. From elevated subways and trains, yeah. Subways / trains. There's no subways, but for good measure. And then as we had this conversation, this whole presentation, when we go to interior drainage, flooding and drain holes, where can we, under 12, the rain collection on roofs as well. It could be point 13, yeah. Rain collection on roofs. Okay. And then Russell has his hand up. Go ahead, Russell.
To add to the air pollution, we've not mentioned anywhere the 2 bus depots that we have in the community.
Right. Okay, yeah, if we could add that with the points of agreement element, or yeah, there too. They mentioned, I'm just looking through my notes, drainage, and there was a word that I'm having a hard time remembering. Holding, it's like holding. Retention, thank you.
Are you talking about like a solution that they mentioned, or are you talking about a challenge of the community?
Yeah, I'm sorry, when we go back to the rain collection, and what word would we use there? Detention on roofs.
Oh, rain collection.
George.
Sorry, yes, rain collection and detention.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, and Debbie has her hand up. And
just very quickly, I know that it seems like there's places in East Harlem that have, you could just smell gas. you know, I don't know, like coming up from the sidewalk or something. It's like, I know on 121st Street in front of the courthouse, there's a place there, and then there's, you know, I mean, we've had issues with the gas explosion, you know, so we have to figure, I think that somehow, I don't know how to word it, but I think, you know, that it's an issue because it's a potential concern.
Maybe like underground gas explosion.
Yeah, yeah, something about underground gas security or maintenance or, you know, something, because it's every week, it's almost every week.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts on how to word that?
I don't know, I gas maintenance or gas infrastructure.
Okay. Maybe we could put it with air quality and pollution.
Or maybe like regular gas checks.
Gas line maintenance and
gas line maintenance, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Look, together we can do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Are there any other comments or additions, deletions?
I have something.
Okay.
I apologize if it comes out all discombobulated because of that very lengthy presentation. It's a lot to process, and I don't think my brain has begun to do that. But you know, there was a lot of so obviously there was a lot of conversation tonight about big. What was the phrase that Jordan mentioned? Basically, like big. Like they proposed like big ideas for like a big problem. That was not like the words he used.
Right.
So there was mention of that, like obviously a bold, he used bold. So like obviously
silver bullet.
Yeah, these solutions were proposed were bold, and the resources that are required to implement these sorts of solutions, obviously, you know, they're exorbitant. But I feel like somewhere in this letter, we need to talk about the importance of doing just that. Like, yes, we understand that we understand that this endeavor is going to require a lot of like resources, a lot of money. And, you know, and they also mentioned something along the lines of how, you know, it was in reference to the pumping, how it's not something that New York City does. And it's like, well, that's just not acceptable anymore. We need to, like, the city just needs to start thinking outside of the box. And we just need to start not only thinking outside of the box, but we need to start investing for the long term. We can't just wait for, you know, we can't wait for a Hurricane Harvey situation to happen. So I don't know that, I feel like it might not be something I might not have the words right now to finalize it, but maybe if we can like agree with the concept, like with like adding like some sort of paragraph about the importance of addressing these issues, understanding how much resources addressing them is going to involve. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, something like
something like that.
Cost benefit analysis. And the complexity of the problems, the issues of ownership and jurisdiction, and I guess issues of consent. I don't know, but the importance of implementing both
the highest quality efforts that are bold and brave.
Great, thank you.
That it requires a bold, brave, because you can always draw these great pictures, but you have to make the commitment. And that's why I said we want the highest grade, possible, because like that statement about, no, we don't do that. It's almost like they've already made a decision on which one of the four they've already decided to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing I would say, and this is just something, just maybe summarizing some of the issues that do face, like that are a challenge in East Harlem. It's basically summarizing in like a few sentences what the East Harlem Resiliency Study, like what the results said, because I feel like there's so many different reports. So there's this East Harlem Resiliency Study, and then they had that like one NYC resiliency plan. And from that came the zoning for coastal resilience. And there's just all of these different moving pieces. And it was so great to have them all in the same room tonight, like not all of them, but like all the different agencies. But I feel like maybe making that connection in this letter, and I can help with that. I think that's important too.
Okay.
think
Yeah,
that's
I completely agree. I don't know, Carly, sorry that I have to default to you on this, but in terms of us voting on the letter tonight with the, you know, adding in what we just talked about from our understanding of this the new information from this presentation we had today, and you know, summarizing with an end sentence or two about the importance of bold action and understanding the complexity and that the cost benefit analysis side. Is there a way we can vote on this?
Yeah, I think so. I think that just, first of all, this is one of the benefits of having a letter as opposed to a resolution. But either way, like, I think that agreeing on the notion, so like, you're gonna vote on the letter as is with the addition of a summary of what was discussed at in the East Harlem Resiliency Update.
Okay. Debbie, did you have another question, or are you making a motion?
No, I think what you know, in terms of the letter, what you can say is, you know, we vote on the letter and then you just add in those recommendations. That's it. You know, that speak to the importance of the having all the people in the room with the goal of creating opportunities for collaboration, clarification, and commitment.
Great. Yeah, and I think it's important to add, you know, if there's any additional points that they mentioned in terms of strategies we could look at, if we could add that in here too in the list, or adjust for that, that would be great. I think it's pretty comprehensive.
I'm going to put social resiliency also.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point. What would we do without you, Carly?
You figure it out, but thank you.
All right, Diane, go ahead.
Only because I see Ray has input something in the chat about emergency preparedness while all these projects are proceeding. He said, can I put in a plug?
Yes.
That's true, because while all of this is going on, we need to also be prepared if another, as you just said, Hurricane Harvey comes up.
Right.
But I would like to, and I speak to Carly and you, Jessica. The question is never about the fact that they prepared this great report, and it's more important about to make sure that they implement most of what they spoke about, because we've been neglected for so long.
Yep.
We want to make sure that whatever you put in the final letter, that it addresses the fact that we have been neglected for so long, and we look forward to working on these projects. Normally, not given this thing a priority in underserved communities.
Yeah, that's an important point. Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you, Ray. I think the point that they made about social connectiveness and build, getting people out of their apartments, and I was like, we already have that. We already have a great community connectedness, but it sounds like the emergency preparedness strategy is like phone a friend, and when the event happens. So I think that's an important thing. Yeah, we should add that as a, you already did. There we go. So thank you. Any other points, and opening the floor for a motion? Go ahead, Diane.
Debbie's hand is up, but I make the motion. I make the motion that this letter that we talk about, all of the 15 points, that we support this letter to go forward to. Who's this going to? Just in general? DEP or?
NYC Environmental Justice Advisory Board.
Okay, that's who. Okay, so you finished it for me, Jessica. Thank you.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great. Thanks, Connie. And Michelle, you had your hand up. Was that to also make a motion?
That was to second it.
Oh, okay. Well, we can have dual seconds.
There you go.
All right, let's do the vote.
Okay, Collier.
I started to say here, Carly.
Here, and okay, yes. Elliot,
Yes.
Giordano,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Mastroda, Francis.
Ooh.
I know she's here. We're waiting for you to unmute, Francis. Okay.
I heard ye.
Is that a yes, Francis? Quinones? Debbie?
Yes.
Schuler?
Yes.
And Wiltshire Clement?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you so much, everyone. I know this is a long meeting. Thank you, Russell, for staying on. I know you had a conflict, so it was important to get the votes in. So what's next on the agenda, Carly? Is it old business?
Yeah.
Oh, the discussion on the DSNY garage. So Russell, I know you had sent us that email. We're talking about we need to appoint someone to the what is it called, Carly? The
Community
action
advisory.
advisory group.
Yeah. The community advisory group.
Okay. For the sanitation garage.
So yeah, the group that formed as a result of the 2017 rezoning points of agreement. Pretty sure. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So I think we need to put someone on that that I've been being part of the calls for the last couple that I've been aware of. So I think there is a general consensus building, I think, that needs to be done. And we spoke to Angel about it over, I think, what was it, last week? It was this week on Monday. Carly, could you just summarize that call for me really quick?
Yeah. So let me just gather my thoughts. So
I'm struggling today.
Yeah. I'm just collecting my thoughts. I'm sorry. Okay, so the community advisory group has to put forward a recommendation. That's what it was formed for, to build consensus and put forward a recommendation for this future permanent dual location garage. They went through, so there was like a site analysis by DSNY, and basically they ruled out all of these options that the community advisory group put forward, and the only one that is remaining is the Potamkin garage. However, Russell, not only Russell, but others have raised concern about that site being the permanent dual garage location. Angel made it very clear that the letter that's put forward by this community advisory group, all it does is give DSNY permission to begin looking into that site as a possible location. It doesn't guarantee anything. So with that said, he said that if the community board takes the position that they still don't want it to be there, they still want DSNY to reconsider other sites that they have previously ruled out, like Rhinebeils Island. That is something that the community board can continue to push for, despite the fact that the community advisory group has to move forward with giving DSNY permission to look into the Potamkin site as a potential for the permanent relocation. I hope I summarized that well.
No, that was great. And he also mentioned about the opportunities we have with the new administrations coming in and being able to make that a an important point moving forward. And obviously it's been an important point for a long time. And I think it's fair, Russell, to say that, at least in my opinion, that there's space on Randall's Island and there's ways that it would be able to, at least be looked at in a greater consideration there. So we're not going to make any decisions about this today, but we're baking in this discussion into almost everything we're doing. So we're keeping them aware in almost every point that, this is still an important point and it needs to be resolved. And right now, the way that it's been handled has not led to a successful, completion. So Russell and anyone else who is passionate about the sanitation garages, please reach out with any additional input, and if you might have interest in being on the community advisory group. Go ahead, Diane.
So, for those of you who do or do not know, I obviously know a great deal about that particular subject matter. But one of the things that has concerned me about the task force is the lack of representation from above 125th Street.
Right.
The people who are most impacted by both of those garages really reside around where it is now and all the way up to 131st Street. Now, Russell, I don't know what your schedule is like, and I don't know what the community board, how wants to handle it. But I think there needs to be a person or persons from above 126th Street to be on that task force. Those are the people most affected by the concentration of those sanitation garages on a daily basis. So I'm not saying put me on, but I most certainly think that there should be a representation from it for us.
How many seats do we have, Carly? I thought we had 2.
I'm gonna have to go back.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Did you have any other thoughts, Diane?
No, I feel very strongly about that. That there is, as far as I can, of the people that I know that sit on it now, there is no one from above 126th Street. Now, you may consider Sean Hill. Sean Hill lives on 126th Street and 5th Avenue.
He's on the group.
I know, but I say that you may consider him that, but you don't have anyone from Lincoln Projects, Riverton, none of the people, Jackie Robinson, MS Houses, there's no one from up in that area who's directly impacted by it.
That's important. And yeah, that it is an issue of the density of those garages and the health and pollution aspects that come with it. So it is important to have that representation.
Right.
Let's keep percolating on this, and let's revisit it as a major topic for next month, so that we can push something out in terms of a board position, a committee position before the summer break. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All righty. I think that's it. All right. Does anyone have any new business? Debbie, you have your hand up, but I think it's an old hand. Okay, no new business. All right, everyone. I'm gonna adjourn the meeting tonight at 9:33. Thank you so much for 3-hour-long meeting, all the work that y'all do. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.
You all.
Boo.